Let's dive into the 6 work shifts. I believe that work is getting more complex and specialized. The labor market is driving major demographic shifts, especially in knowledge work. Many of the easy jobs of the past are disappearing. Our work beliefs are increasingly disconnected from reality and not as useful. We are all becoming learners and people fully responsible for a lifetime of learning. And creating your own work is hard. Let's go back to my hypothesis from the last lecture. I believe that work feels shittier because it is increasingly disconnected from what work claims it will do for us. And I think these 6 shifts will help give you a lens of which to understand what's really happening in work and see where you actually have opportunity to carve your own path, do different things with work, and try to find more satisfaction. The first shift I want to highlight is that work is getting more complicated. This is based on research that was done actually while I was there at BCG. They found that in the 20% of most complicated organizations, managers are spending 40% of their time writing reports and 30 to 60% of their time in coordination meetings. This means managers are potentially spending up to 100% of their time just managing complexity and no longer doing work. This has led to a dramatic increase over the last 60 years of complexity. BCG estimated 4 to 6 times of the performance measurements and KPIs that an average business is tracking. Everyone can recognize something like this if they've ever worked in a medium and large organization. Many dashboards, right? But you feel increasingly disconnected. If you're measured on 100 things, you're effectively measured on nothing. So let's go to a scenario. We need an initiative to simplify this chaos, says the manager, and the young analyst retorts back, won't that add more to the complexity? You want me out of a job? This is common thinking, right? We don't want to optimize our jobs too much such that we might lose our actual job. Good point. I'll get started on the detailed plan and roadmap. And this scenario repeats over and over again in modern organizations, increasing the complexity. You don't get paid to do nothing, you're always getting paid to do something. Now, what is the toll of this? We've had many people weigh in on the cost of specialization, right? Alan Watts said specialization, mechanized thinking, puts man out of touch with the marvelous powers of instinct which govern his body. Joe Freeman, an activist leader from the 60s and 70s in the feminist movement, wrote this incredible essay, I'll link it up, called The Tyranny of Structurelessness, about successful activist groups. And she wrote one of the 4 requirements that there was a low degree of skill specialization, right? The most effective teams in her experience, and she helped accomplish great things, was teams where people could do many different things, and nobody actually was that deep. Wendell Berry is a farmer and writer. He's seen the cost of specialization as industrialization has taken over local and small farmers. Hazard of the specialist system is that it produces specialists, people that are expensively trained to do one thing, right? He highlights the medical doctors skilled at expensive cures for diseases that have no skill and no interest in preventing. People intuitively get this when they think about people that work with their hands. There's a certain pride and value to the work that you get to see what you create. On the right, you see the image from Office Space. Everyone resonates with the spiritual anguish and the tension here, right? Everyone acknowledges that there is some sort of disconnection from doing things on a spreadsheet to actually doing the work in person. David White's quote here really gets to the heart of this. He wrote an incredible book called The Heart Aroused, where he talked about the spiritual costs of the corporate world in the 90s. I highly recommend reading it. I'll link that up as well. But just pause here and reflect on this quote. Take a second and read it. With increased complexity and specialization comes this abstraction and disconnection from who we really want to be at work. The second shift I want to highlight is based on research by MIT economist David Autor, and he talks about how the labor economy has radically reshaped itself around who's educated and what jobs are available. 30 years ago, the college graduate would go to a city for a job, but then after a certain number of years, they would say, I want to start a family and head out to the suburbs. This was a common occurrence, and now the college graduate is going to the city and staying. And the challenges they face now are, damn, daycare is expensive. The rent is really high. It's a new way of working, right? The good jobs are in the city, and we'll get to that. But it does add to increased anxiety and stress on the financial side. 30 years ago, the non-college graduate, and there were many more of them, did move to a city. They could make more money there. And they would say, wow, the pay is so much better. Now they might be coming from the suburb, or they're living in the city, and they're just staying in their local community. Pay is the same, David Autor finds in his labor research, whereas the premium used to be much higher for anyone moving to a city. It is only a premium for college graduates now. So why would they move to a more expensive city? This is leading to a major gap in college degrees. In 1950 or 1970, there wasn't a big gap between cities and rural areas. Now, a degree determines where you live. If you have a degree, you're much more likely to go live in a city. And if you don't have a degree, you're not going to move to the city anymore. The third trend, and this builds on the same research that I just highlighted in the second shift, is that the quote-unquote easy jobs are disappearing. This right here is a chart from David Autor's research, and he shows that middle-skill jobs are essentially disappearing across the last 4 decades. Low-skill jobs pretty much staying the same, still available, and high-skill jobs, those professional jobs in the cities for college graduates, are dramatically increasing. You can think of middle wage jobs as middle manager jobs, office jobs, clerical jobs, often even blue collar jobs like manufacturing jobs. And they all had something in common, which was that there was solid pay and benefits. Oftentimes these jobs had pensions and other community benefits and aspects of working in these jobs that help people live a pretty satisfying life. With this shift, there's now 2 tiers of jobs emerging, right? It's the low-skilled jobs and the high-skilled jobs, except the high-skilled jobs are increasingly abstracted from what people are actually working on, and the low-skilled jobs, while they're necessary, they come with very low pay, leaving a gap where there's no real jobs where the work that you actually want to be doing. So in the 1930s, Bertrand Russell wrote a famous essay called In Praise of Idleness, and he argued that immense harm is caused by the belief that work is virtuous. And the argument he was making was that this belief really holds us back from imagining new ways of working, new ways of organizing society, and we still remain attached fundamentally to this idea. So where does it come from? I'm going to give you a very high level and overly simplified model of our modern beliefs of work. And they really just come from 2 main schools of thought. One is the Catholic belief that work is toil, and this comes straight from the Bible. And the second is an updated spin on that by John Calvin in the Protestant Reformation. It said work is its own reward. This was refined even later, and here's Thomas Carlyle from the 1800s, all true work is sacred. In all true work were it but true hand labor, where there is something of divineness. So work is divine. It is a way to have salvation on earth. The modern form of this we see is find work you love and never work a day in your life. So we have this modern idea that work is virtuous, and we have both the Catholic and Protestant flavors of that. But we also have this belief that there are bountiful good jobs available. And the lack of many of these good jobs, as we saw in some of the previous shifts, leads to a lot of confusion around how we talk about work. Let's go back to the two jobs which David Autor says make up our modern economy, the high skill and low skill jobs. What are they saying about these work beliefs? The spreadsheet jockey is saying, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get meaning or fulfillment out of just responding to messages on Slack and updating this report all day. Whereas the low skill worker has her own set of problems, right? Work is toil, sure, but at least give me some societal benefit for it. I can't even plan my schedule more than 2 days ahead of time. David Graeber captured some of this existential despair, especially among the high-skilled, high-paid wage workers of what he called a bullshit job. And this was based on hundreds of conversations and surveys and research he did into which people have jobs in which they classify them as pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious. And as part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obliged that this is not the case. And this is leading to a deep dissatisfaction in which it's driving many people to enroll in courses like this and ask the deeper questions of, if not this, what am I supposed to be doing to give me some meaning in my work? What a lot of these shifts mean is that there's more individual responsibility, which leads to more stress. But it also means you need to own your learning. You need to constantly be acquiring new skills. As you can see, there are tons of new skills, right? Everybody's aware of these. You always need to be up to date and relevant. So let's go back to David Autor's chart again. As we can see, there's been a dramatic increase in high-skilled jobs. This is one of the good things about the labor market, right? Except it means we need to constantly be updating and high-skilling ourselves. Here's the problem. Here's 10 college graduates. How many of them do you think work in the major that they graduated in? Turns out less than 3 out of 10 people end up working in their major. What are the stakes of this? The problem is our mental model still says we learn, then we basically don't learn anymore, right? We see learning as going into an institution and being taught things. And we work, then we retire. The new model looks something like this, with the blue line being constant learning in shifts, right? We might have multiple careers, and you're probably still learning even in retirement as you figure out how to engage with society. Just think about how doing things in society takes so much more work these days. My grandmother uses an iPad and requires constant lessons to update her skills. When I talk to people in college, they're always energized and they're always telling me the same thing. So after they get some of their energy out, they are telling me, I want to do my own thing, right? I'm going to go work in consulting for 2 years so I can learn how to run a business. I'm going to go work in the corporate world so I can learn how to run a business. However, what they discovered down the road is that creating your work is much higher stakes and much harder, and is less about learning skills in the corporate world and more about developing skills on your own. Being middle class in America used to mean starting your own businesses. This is from Cubed. By 1950, it meant almost invariably that you put on a suit and tie and went to work in an office alongside millions like you. And I think a big driver of this is that the fact of creating your own work, it remains incredibly hard. This is a graphic from Tiago Forte, a successful freelancer and a writer, and he's written about the idea of a full-stack freelancer. And the idea is that an individual, basically by using technology, can run a pretty dynamic business by themselves. However, the underlying challenge here, right, is that you have to learn all these tools. You basically have to be good at technology and experimenting and updating platforms as they evolve. I believe this is why people still opt for full-time work. Here you see me. I am creating these videos for this course, and this entire week has been learning, except it's unpaid learning, right? I don't have the security of a paycheck. I have a light over here I figured out how to use. I'm trying to use these video cameras. I'm trying to learn all these video tools. I get a kick out of the process, but for many people, this can be frustrating and enough friction to send them back to full-time work. Full-time work solves a matching problem. It says, hey, person wanting to do cool shit, you can do your cool shit over here, as long as you do some other stuff that you don't actually want to do. So do it yourself, learn to code, chase down contracts, deal with the uncertainty of financial insecurity. Full-time work, there's some BS, but it's still a better deal for most people. And I think often that freelance and self-employment work is way too often glorified because we haven't figured out some of these challenges of creating your own work. People say, screw that, and say, I'm going to do the full-time work thing.